I think Jill Biden, has an understandable instinctive impulse to build up her husband's confidence. She, I think, believes very much the Biden law that I just outlined, the family law about being knocked down and getting up again. Um, I hope what will dawn upon her, and I think probably will dawn upon her in time, is that her husband's legacy, which she's fighting so hard to protect, will turn to ashes if he loses to Trump, because then his name will forever be associated with a selfish decision to cling on past bedtime, as it were, to a job he was no longer capable or perceived to be capable of doing. And everything he's achieved will turn to ashes. That's not a legacy worth protecting. I hope that that will dawn upon her.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. After last week's disastrous performance in the first debate, what is Joe Biden's likely future as the Democratic candidate for the United States presidential election in November? What will be the result if he stubbornly refuses to step down and insists on contesting the election? On the other hand, what will be the consequences if he steps aside and the party has to find another candidate? As America celebrates its Independence Day, those are the issues I shall raise today with the chief United States commentator and columnist of the Financial Times, a former chief of bureau in South Asia, Edward Luce. Ed Luce, I want to focus this interview on Joe Biden's future as the Democratic candidate for the US presidential election in November. After his disastrous performance in last week's presidential debate, what would be the likely outcome if he refuses to stand down and insists on contesting the election?
If he refuses to stand down, the clamor for him to quit will just grow and grow and grow. Um, and he would be put in a very awkward position where more and more of his party would come out in public and say, look, we need a new candidate. We love you, Joe. You've done a great job. But it's time to take the driving keys, the car keys away from Grandpa. Um, uh, and if he then, even after that, continued to cling to the job, or at least, sorry, to the nomination, because he would stay president if he withdrew his name from the ticket, then all the numbers and every sort of ounce of common sense tells you he will lose to Donald Trump on November the 5th. And when the second debate happens on the 10th of September, it would be a great shock if he fared any differently than he did in the first debate a week ago. This was the product, remember, of 6 days of preparation, doing nothing else, having a lot of good sleep. He'd been traveling, but this jet lag excuse he gives doesn't really add up since he'd returned to the United States 12 days before the debate. So I would be astonished if that was one bad night, as his team are putting it about. I think it only gets worse. And of course, if it happens in September, then it's too late to replace him as the Democratic nominee. So the answer to your question is, I'm afraid, unremittingly negative. If he stays on the ticket, he loses, and more importantly, America loses.
Now, in an op-ed you wrote for your paper, The Financial Times, on Saturday, you said Biden is a stubborn man. If he refuses to step down, could he also have a significant impact on the Democratic Party's performance in elections for the House, as well as in elections for the 1/3 of Senate seats that are up for grabs?
Very much so. There will be a drag on the ticket, as they say. If you look at the polls now of Biden versus Democratic senators or Democrats running for the House, they're polling considerably above him. So the problem isn't with the Democratic brand as such. It is with Biden in particular. It is with the American voters' perception of his cognitive ability to be president for another 4 years. There was an extraordinary poll. I don't normally obsess over polls, but some polls, are consistent enough over time to have very meaningful information in them. And there was a CBS News poll last Sunday, a couple of days after the debate, that showed only 27% of Americans believed that Biden had the cognitive ability to be president. 27%. The number for Trump, incidentally, was 50%. A gap like that between 1 in 4, just above, and 1 in 2, scream. If that does not terrify Democrats, I don't know what would.
In Britain, if it's perceived that it's time for a party leader to go, a committee of party elders meet with him or her and give him what's metaphorically called in Britain a pearl-handled revolver. And the message is perfectly clear. Is there an equivalent procedure in America? I get the sense that the Democratic Party is fuming in private, but they don't know quite how to persuade the man not to contest.
I think at the moment, I mean, the answer to your first question is no. He's already won the nomination. And therefore there is nothing that can be done to remove him. It's entirely up to him. Clearly his family, his wife, the First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, is the most influential person in his life. If she doesn't want Biden to go, and it appears she doesn't, then there's very little that, the proverbial committee of elders, including Clinton's and Obama and party leaders in the Senate and the House, there's very little they can do. If Biden is proving the adage that there's nothing as stubborn as a stubborn old man, then they've got to live with it. And that's I fear becoming the reality right now.
Before I move to the next question, do you have any sense of how Biden's explanation, I believe it was given yesterday, that he was exhausted, and he added he almost fell asleep at the podium during the debate. How was that received in America? I mean, I would imagine most people would have both laughed it off and laughed at the possibility that a man could fall asleep in the middle of a debate.
I mean, I have to say the number of times that he said during that debate in his answer to Trump, he started on a point and clearly forgot it, and then said number 2 or number 3, and then forgot that too. That was too repetitive to be of any comfort. Nobody else was falling asleep, is I think the best way of putting this. People were on the edge of their seats, either with glee if you were a Trump supporter, or with utter sort of despair and a deep sense of pain and sorrow, I think, if you were a Biden supporter, to watch this man dissolve really over 90 minutes like that. The tiredness excuse, he had a cold excuse, the jet lag, none of this is really meets the criticisms, which is that he lacks the vitality and energy to continue to be president for another 4 years, let alone to beat Trump in order to get there. So I don't think it was a very well thought out explanation for what was a deeply embarrassing performance.
Now, there are just about 6 weeks to go for the Democratic Convention in Chicago. I believe it starts on the 19th of August. Is that enough time for the party to find another credible nominee?
Where there is a will, there is a way. I'm actually sitting here in Britain where Rishi Sunak called a snap election on May the 22nd, and on July the 4th, which happens to be today when we're talking, there will be a result. That's a change of government for a country. What we're talking about with the Democratic nomination is a party's nomination process. That's not a general election. So yes, I think it's entirely possible. In fact, I think it's likely that you could have a plausible candidate at the end of this. 5-6 weeks of intense debate, followed by the votes of the delegates at the convention in Chicago. It's a pretty straightforward task they'd have, and doubtless there would be disputes, there would be bitterness, there would be some ideological splits would show. But I think in these circumstances, with Trump as the nominee, as Trump as the opponent, however bitter those differences were, the Democrats would unite behind whoever won the nomination.
In which case, the critical question is, who is likely to succeed him? Kamala Harris is the vice president, but she's, I gather, not very popular. But if she's overlooked, won't it offend the Black community and perhaps women voters as well?
It could well do. I mean, that old phrase, let the best man win, amended quite rightly to let the best person win, would sound like let the best white man win to a lot of Democratic ears, to a lot of non-white Democratic ears. If Biden withdrew, and in withdrawing did not say, and I would like to hand this nomination to my vice president, Kamala Harris. I don't think he could actually hand the nomination to her, but if he didn't endorse her strongly as his preferred successor, it would sound pretty harsh and alienating to large sections of the Democratic Party. On the other hand, if it's an open contest and their energy, matches or exceeds those of other voters supporting other candidates, she could well win it and become the nominee. And that, I think, if I were Kamala Harris, is how I would prefer to get the nomination. Having it handed to you smacks way too much of an inside establishment fix-up of exactly the kind of thing that Donald Trump would make hay with.
Now, two other people who are being canvassed or talked about as potential candidates to succeed Biden are the California Governor Gavin Newsom and the Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. They're both said to be talented and highly successful governors, but will they throw their hat into the ring before Biden steps out of it? At the moment, I believe they're still, for the front face of it, staunch supporters of him.
Yeah, the degree to which they're staunch and ultra loyal makes me realize they're definitely running. That's no, they will not come out. None of the potential rivals would dare risk being Brutus to Biden's Caesar. That would sink their chances. They would be seen as betraying him, and their ambition would be seen as overweening. So they convey their ambition by taking down Trump on social media, on TV, in a brutal and effective way that sort of implies to the viewer, to the reader, that Biden can't do this. So that's how the auditioning is happening. But it's not just Gavin Newsom. I mean, Gavin Newsom's governor of, the largest and richest state in America, would obviously have a very good shout at the job. But remember, California is a sort of epitome of some of the more outlandish social liberalism we've seen in the last few years. And as governor of California, Newsom, has endorsed, in terms of the sort of pronoun battle, and in terms of gender fluidity, and in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, he's endorsed some of the more contestable fringe positions that would look fringe elsewhere in the country, but in California are mainstream. So he would, I think, this is precisely why you need a contest. These things would come out in the wash over 5-6 weeks. His rivals would bring this up. His rivals would see how he responded. So I'm a bit skeptical about him.
There are some people who are talking about Michelle Obama, who, like Harris, is a woman and she's Black. But unlike Harris, I believe she's well thought of and popular. The only problem is she doesn't have an obvious political background other than being Barack Obama's wife. So is she being seriously thought about?
So, I mean, Michelle Obama's the fantasy candidate. She's a sort of West Wing candidate. A lot of Democrats live in a sort of TV magical world in which the people who make it to the top of politics are not just intelligent and public spirited, but glamorous and reflect the best of us and make you look good when you look in the mirror. This isn't the real world. Michelle Obama has zero interest in entering politics. It's never going to happen. She did her best to stop her husband from going into politics. She's very much in that respect the opposite of Jill Biden. She was so relieved when those 8 years were over. It's a fantasy that's not going to happen.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.
Suppose the Democrats end up with an open convention in Chicago on the 19th of August. The last time that happened in 1968, you said in your column on Saturday, it turned into a circular firing squad. Is the party worried that history might repeat itself? Is that, in a sense, likely to perturb them?
Yeah, there is a very strong lingering post-traumatic stress disorder there with Chicago 1968. The analogies are not perfect. You know, there is the divided party, and there is the fact that it's in Chicago. Those two things remain true. The context for 68 was that there was a war in Vietnam going on. Thousands of Americans were dying. I think 1968 was where the maximum, the peak year for American casualties in Vietnam. The level of protest against that and a million other things with the counterculture left was really at its peak. And it's hard to imagine how the Democrats would have unified behind one candidate. The one who did get nominated and lost to Nixon later that year was Hubert Humphrey. And he was he'd become the epitome of the smoke-filled room party boss, fixing it up. We're living in a very different age now. We don't have a Vietnam War. There isn't one, the one sort of crisis, the one sense of existential fear that's around is that Trump comes back. So I think there's a much, much more concentrating of minds as to what the Democratic Party needs to do. And I don't think the mayor of Chicago is going to send in the cops to beat up every protester they can find. It's just they've learned one or two crowd management techniques since 1968 that would hopefully be beneficial this time round.
Now, you wrote in your column on Saturday that there are only two people who can influence Biden. One is Jill, his wife, and we know what her views are because you explained them. But the other is his son, Hunter Biden. And I've read that Biden speaks to Hunter every single day. Do we have any sense of how Hunter views his father's future? Does Hunter believe his father must dig in his heels and stay on?
Yes, I think that the entire family appear to be unified. They're sort of circling the wagons. And that's partly because of the whole family law. You know, Hunter Biden was an infant when his father, when he was with his mother in a car crash. His mother died, his sister died, and he and his older brother, Beau Biden, were the two survivors from that crash. And Joe Biden was a young senator. This was 1972. He'd just been elected to the US Senate, aged 30, so the youngest you can be. And the idea that no matter how bad the odds are, that Joe Biden just bounces back. Beau Biden, Hunter's brother, he died of brain cancer a few years ago. Biden Sr., the president, has been counted out so many times before. He dropped out in sort of ignominy from the 1988 presidential Democratic nomination contest after it was found he was plagiarizing Neil Kinnock, the British Labour leader of the time, and another number of other gaffes. He was counted out in 2008 when he ran in the field of very, very glamorous, tall, political figures like Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, saved by being made Obama's vice president. He was counted out in 2020. I knew of nobody who thought that this already old man was going to beat a very strong sort of range of candidates to be the Democratic nominee. But then he did so again against media conventional wisdom. And his campaign had this phrase, Twitter is not real life, because Twitter was convinced Biden was finished, but the voters thought otherwise. So there is this sort of deep sense in the Biden psyche for the family as well, that whenever he's down, he just proves people wrong. And I fear that that is exactly the mindset they have now, which is that they're all wrong again. We're just going to disprove them. And even if they eventually see that their dad is too old, time is of the essence. 5-6 weeks to the convention is not long, as you've pointed out. But 2-3 weeks might not be, it might just be too late by then.
Let me ask you one more question about Jill Biden. Clearly, her principal intention must be to protect her man. But much as she may want him to become president again, can she take the risk of a second meltdown at the second presidential debate on September? Because on that occasion, the pressure on Biden will be so enormous, it might be very difficult for a man who's just 2 months short of 82 to actually handle.
Yeah, well, remember in the build-up to this debate, Trump kept telling people that Biden was going to take cocaine or a shot in the ass, as he kept putting it. Now, clearly, Biden didn't take cocaine. Otherwise, he wouldn't have almost fallen asleep, from what I understand of cocaine. And he didn't take a shot in the ass either, ditto, for the same reasons. Maybe some slightly stronger medication would be taken before the September 10th debate, if indeed he was still nominee by then. But I think Jill Biden, has an understandable, instinctive impulse to build up her husband's confidence. She, I think, believes very much the Biden law that I just outlined, the family law about being knocked down and getting up again. I hope what will dawn upon her, and I think probably will dawn upon her in time, is that her husband's legacy, which she's fighting so hard to protect, will turn to ashes if he loses to Trump, because then his name will forever be associated with a selfish decision to cling on past bedtime, as it were, to a job he was no longer capable or perceived to be capable of doing. And everything he's achieved will turn to ashes. That's not a legacy worth protecting. I hope that will dawn upon her. But right now, I see no sign of it.
Tell me this, in the event, and at the moment it does seem unlikely that Biden does step down, is it almost certain that Trump will then win against whoever replaces Biden? Or could that new nominee give Trump a real fight for his money?
It depends to some degree on who the new nominee is. But I think if Trump is on September the 10th on a stage with a younger, vigorous candidate who shows vitality, command of the facts, and is able to rebut his gargantuan, whopping lies that he just sort of streams out at such a speed, in a way that Biden just simply wasn't able to on almost any of the lies Trump told, then I think Trump would be in a very difficult position. He would look like the old man he would look like the person with cognitive issues. And a lot of the swing voters and independents who would like to vote against Trump but just can't bring themselves to support Biden would now have permission to support whoever the Democratic nominee was. So I think what we would be in for is a period of chaos until Labor Day, which is traditionally, it's early September. It's traditionally the beginning of that official general election campaign. But then on Labor Day, you have a new ticket that's young and terrifies the bejesus out of Trump. So I think this could actually be a what they call a flip the narrative situation. Plus, those 6-8 weeks would have been dominated by in the news cycles by the Democratic Party. Trump just won't have been on TV. This would suck up all the energy. So I think actually it could be very, very bad news for Trump, for Biden to drop out. I suspect he's got Biden exactly where he wants him, and he doesn't want him to go anywhere.
Could Kamala Harris do that? Or is she unlikely to? And is it more likely to happen if Newsom or Whitmer are the new candidates?
I have to say I am skeptical about Kamala Harris's political skills. She did contest the nomination in 2020, and she dropped out before the first primary, before Iowa, because she just wasn't resonating. She just didn't have the retail skills to really appeal to voters, and she was nowhere in the polls, so she dropped out. And Biden single-handedly brought her career back to life by making her his running mate a few months later. Now, 3.5 years is quite a long time, and it's the best sort of training sort of venue, to be president, to be vice president. You're sitting there in a front row seat. You're in the room. You're in the Oval Office. So she might have grown. And in some respects, on some issues like the abortion issue, she's been pretty fiery. So I wouldn't count her out. I'm skeptical, but I haven't written her off. But that's precisely why there has to be a contest and not a coronation.
Two last questions then, Luce. Would I be right in saying no matter what happens between now and November the 5th, politically, America is going to be both a very exciting place, but also a very uncertain and troubled place?
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of, whoever's the script writer for America season 7, I don't know, they seem to be going too far this time, because some of this is sort of House of Cards or Game of Thrones. This is quite outlandish what's going on. Uncertainty, therefore, would be an understatement. The stakes in November cannot be overstated. The Supreme Court has just given Donald Trump, well, the US president generically, but Donald Trump in particular, almost complete immunity from any official act taken as president, up to and including killing people, ordering their assassination. The whole American Constitution was really about not having kings, was nobody being above the law. We have just had the most breathtaking ruling from Trump-appointed judges on the Supreme Court that essentially gives the opportunity to reinvent a monarchical presidency with immunity for his executive actions. And Trump has made very clear he will use those powers with impunity. He will be the retribution, as he says, of Americans who feel they need retribution. What he means is his own personal retribution. And so I think, the American story as a liberal democracy, as an enduring republic, is under threat in a way that has not been since the 1860 presidential election on the eve of the American Civil War. That is high stakes. And it sounds like hyperbole that I'm talking. It really isn't.
Tell me something, and this is my last question. How panic-stricken are America's closest allies in Europe, and I suppose NATO in particular, at the increasing likelihood of a second Trump presidency?
Deep dread. there's all kinds of conversations the whole time about how do we Trump-proof ourselves? How do we Trump-proof NATO? Because Trump hates NATO. Or Zelensky's effort to stave off the Putin's invasion. There was no easy answer to this, but it is preoccupying European leaders and leaders all over the world. Some, of course, are looking forward to a Trump presidency with relish. And, I would include in that Moscow, Beijing, Tehran. Tehran might have slightly mixed feelings because he does have warlike intentions. But North Korea, of course, Kim Jong-un, striking out that weird friendship with Trump during his first term. So what former National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski called the axis of the aggrieved. They will be happy at Trump's rising prospects. The democratic world, for the most part, is in a deep sort of slough of despond. There is a sense of foreboding that is unmissable. You cannot mistake it for anything other than dread, and a sense of slight helplessness as to what can be done to take out insurance against this eventuality.
Edward Luce, thank you very much for the time you've made available for me and for opening our eyes to all the intricate possibilities that lie ahead between now and the 5th of November. Take care. Stay safe.
Always a pleasure, Karen. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch The Interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.